Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. We are very grateful that you are spending 30 minutes or so with us today. I am Susan Pittman, the founder of Drug Free Duval and the team lead of the Employer Workforce Committee of the North Florida Poly Drug Task Force. And the Small Bites Workshop Series is a benefit of the Employer Toolkit, which was developed by the committee. The committee is chaired by Dr. Kelly Tice of Guidewell and TJ Ward of Project Opioid, and they have given great leadership to help provide the vision, to work through the vision, which is a prevention-minded, recovery-supportive workplace. And so the toolkit is designed to help workplaces figure out how they can do this, how they can create a culture that is both prevention-minded and recovery-supportive, and touches on things like policies, education, training, and literal tools that you can use in the workplace to make this happen. Just real quick, a little bit of data. As you can see, it is astounding, and this is according to the Congressional Joint Economic Committee, that the opioid crisis alone has cost the United States almost $1.5 trillion. And please note that is in 1 year, and that was an increase of 40% from the prior year. I mean, this is costing us money. It is good business for employers to pay attention to this and say, how can we implement processes, policies, et cetera, into our workplace where employees spend most of their days that can start chipping away at that money? Because guess what? Then that can go into higher payment for our employees. It can go into better benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And inequities are really revealed as we look at this data and we really start to tear it down. Black people account for about 12.5% of the US population, yet they were 17% of the fatal opioid overdoses. And if you look at overdoses totaled 107,633, honestly, that number has been increased. We're now up to about 110,000. But regardless, it's the equivalent of a 737 jet going down every single day with no survivors. This is something we all need to pay attention to. So a few stats about employees and substances on the job. Look at this, you guys. 2.3 million people in the United States consumed alcohol before going to work. And about 66% of US employees, this is self-reported, have drunk alcohol at work, with more than 9% having to deal with a hangover while they're, trying to perform their duties, right? I mean, so alcohol is definitely still an issue, even though we have all these other things going on. And per drugabuse.com, 22.5% of the respondents report they'd used drugs or alcohol during work hours, with nearly 14% using recreational marijuana 1 to 2 times a month, weekly or daily. So you can see nearly 8% report using codeine, Adderall, and Ritalin in the same way. And look at that, 10% of people surveyed report using pain medications outside of medical need at work. So that means that they are trying to somehow seek the euphoria that those meds can create. Why do employees use substances while on the job? Well, at the end of the day, if you look at this whole thing per the American Workplace 7 study, which it's been done year after year after year, it boils down mostly to stress. So when you see that over 80% of workers feel stress on the job, and half say, listen, all of these things are just crazy. Half say they need help in learning how to manage stress. 42% say a coworker needs such help. So if you're in your job and your coworker's just right on the edge and you don't know, you're not a professional, you don't know how to handle that, those things cause stress not only for the coworker that's experiencing the stress, but for the coworker sitting next to them or trying to work alongside them. And look at this, 25%. That is 1 out of 4 of our workers report that they've felt like screaming or shouting due to work stress. Maybe we need to have a shouting room or a screaming room, right? But about 10% fear that an individual at work may become violent due to stress. This is real workplace stress. And you know what? If you are feeling really uncomfortable, then sometimes you relieve it in ways that aren't the best for yourself or the company. And look at that, 14% of respondents felt like striking a coworker. So we really want to focus today on some of the potential risks that are unfolding to the employer. So this is a little bit of legalese, but please note that an employer could be responsible for injuries, that's physical, emotional, or material, because of acts or emissions by an employee under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that is under federal law. And it's often, many of the state laws also have that same thing. And there's two different theories. There's the respondent superior and there's the negligent retention, which also includes negligent hiring for like pre-employment. So if you are not dealing with an issue in a way that later gets brought to court, then you could be held responsible as an employer. And look, per OSHA, employers have the responsibility to provide a safe workplace. Well, now that we know what we know about the caustic reality of fentanyl and being able to touch it and get it into a mucous membrane area or something like that and potentially overdose without even being aware of it, it's really, really critical that employers begin to face this and figure out some great things to do. So today we have Brock Powell, who's the managing partner and employee benefits specialist for voluntary benefits at work. So we are going to hear the interview between TJ Ward and Brock. So let's listen to that great interview.
Good afternoon, Brock. Thanks for hanging out with us here on our Small Bites webinar, our Small Bites workshop for our Employer Workforce Committee. How you been? You doing all right?
Yeah, doing fine. Just welcomed a new little baby boy into the world. So he's 2 months old, Jonathan Boyce Powell. So doing great.
Awesome. And that name carries some significance. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but we're going to jump right into the questions because we have a limited amount of time. We want to make sure that we respect everybody's time that's on the call. So can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your experience in this industry, and then also the company that you lead right now?
Sure. So I've been 28 years in the employee benefits business. I started out with Aflac back in 1995. Was a district manager with them and a regional manager in Kentucky for 20 years. Also owned my own insurance agency up there for 20 plus years. And recently I've been a managing partner with a company called Voluntary Benefits at Work. Been with them now for the last going on 5 years. And mainly what we do is we work with businesses and their employee benefits and educating their employees on different types of employee benefits, from supplemental to major medical type insurance.
And so you obviously have a ton of experience, and you joined forces with us on the Employer Workforce Committee, specifically as it relates to the employer toolkit, helping us create prevention-minded, recovery-supportive workplaces within local businesses, teaming up with business leaders to really help their employees with issues related to substance use disorder, mental health. So my question for you is, why does this issue matter so much to you?
For me personally, this obviously has hit home with us. Years ago when I worked in Kentucky, I was there in the early 90s up through 2000s and saw firsthand a lot of the opioid epidemic there in Kentucky and the devastation that it had, but it was always somebody else. It wasn't until March 19th of 2021 when my brother-in-law, Jonathan Millwood, 28 years old, passed away from a fentanyl poisoning. He had taken what he thought to be a Xanax, and it was laced with fentanyl, and took his life at 28 years old. So it's very, very personal to me and my wife and our family. And so we wanted to get involved and hopefully, prevent other families and people from going through something like this. And Whitney and I both, Whitney's the regional manager with Aflac here in Jacksonville. And we both felt like our expertise of working with employers and communicating benefits would be a way that we could help in trying to help with this employer toolkit and educate employers on it.
Yeah, and I have the privilege of knowing you and Whitney for a little bit now. And again, so sorry for your loss. I think, don't you have a picture of Jonathan you could maybe pan over and show us there in your office? I know you were sharing that with me earlier.
This is our home office. And there's a picture of Jonathan there. Jonathan was just all-American kid, 6'3", loved life, talked to everybody, just a social butterfly. And unfortunately, took a pill that was not what he thought it was, and it killed him.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Maybe if you could share a little bit about Jonathan, and I know you mentioned great guy. We all saw what an attractive young guy he was, and seemed to have everything going for him. Was doing really well. Was he working with Aflac as well?
Yeah, he was one of our district managers actually in San Diego, California. And Whitney and I had moved back to Jacksonville during the pandemic. And Jonathan had stayed out there to work, and we were running our office remotely. And a lot of California was on shelter in place, and Jonathan wanted to stay out there. He had a girlfriend. And throughout all of that, I think just the whole being sheltered, being in his home all the time, being cut off and isolated from other people, I think he probably started slipping into a little bit of depression or anxiety, and unfortunately made the decision to go get a pill, and unfortunately it was poisoned. But yeah, he was one of our district managers, was doing great. He had hit his quotas, made his bonuses, and was doing phenomenal. Was very successful with it.
The reason I asked that, Brock, is because we have employers, business leaders who are watching this here today, and sometimes they may think, I don't know how much this really applies to my workforce or my employees, but we know that oftentimes, it's not just the people who struggle, that are engaged with this. It's sometimes people who are doing really well and successful and have been able to build up some type of tolerance to be able to use these substances, but still, perform in the workplace. And there's some telltale signs that maybe can, tip off that they might be struggling a little bit. And so that's one of the reasons we want to engage employers in this, this issue, especially as it relates to the toolkit. And I know we've kind of alluded to some of this already, but I want to ask you, what are some of the implications, if an employer says, look, this just isn't for me, I don't have time for this right now, what are some of the implications that, could be associated with that type of approach? Both, let me just say this, both for the individual employee and for the company.
Yeah, I mean, so it's happening. And to your point, it's not just the employee. But let's take a look at it of how this can impact my business. If I'm the business owner, I have an employee who maybe suffers from this, and it could be any type of addiction, but we're talking about the opioid crisis. I may be suffering from it, and I go out and I'm on the job working, and I wind up injuring one of my coworkers at the workplace, and now the business is liable for that. It impacts our workers' compensation if I own the company, because we start having injuries that occur on the job due to not being absentee, but being present, right? It'd be better off sometimes if they wasn't at work, because they're endangering themselves and coworkers because they're showing up to work impaired. From the standpoint of it not just being me, the employee, but maybe it's my spouse or dependent or a nephew or a niece that's suffering through something like this, it impacts the whole family. And so through like having access to the employer toolkit, maybe I then have the tools and resources to be able to guide and help maybe another family member of mine. Because if you have a family member that's going through this, it impacts everybody. And if you're going through it and you're showing up at work, it impacts you throughout the day as well. From another liability standpoint, you look at if I'm operating equipment, right? I'm operating the business equipment and I'm impaired, property and casualty rates are going to go up. And then on the medical side, if I'm looking for just purely health insurance, then from a major medical health insurance standpoint, you're going to have an increase in rates as well, because they not only are going to suffer from one incident, it's going to lead to other things as well. And so while I may not want to be involved, I can't just stick my head in the sand. And what we think is, what we believe is just education. If most people just knew, if they had education about it and they had the resources, people don't want to be junkies. People don't want to be addicted. People don't want these problems. And a lot of times they just don't know how to gain the resources to be able to get help. And that's because of something I know you'll talk about, TJ, which is the stigma. The stigma, of having this label, and so therefore I don't go get help. And for a business to think, well, we don't have these problems at our work, then statistically that's not true.
Yeah, very well said. And I wonder if we wanted to shift that and maybe come at it from a positive approach. What are some things that you have seen occur within a business that actually embraces, this as a responsibility or as an opportunity? Let's not even call it an obligation. Let's call it an opportunity to really help their employees to set up, the people that they employ for success as it relates to this issue. What are some positive things that you've seen occur for business owners or business leaders that embrace this?
Well, just having the education, right? And having during a part of typically like an open enrollment period when they're explaining their benefits, or either as a part of their onboarding with their new hire process, to include information about this and education, from something as simple as how to dispose of old medication to even Narcan training. Those are things that we've seen that have been a positive impact. And also too, just including it in today's world as a part of their enrollment platforms that they're enrolling their benefits on and things of that nature. We've seen that be a positive impact. We even had one of our construction companies that we're working with. They've asked us to, at their open enrollment this year, to do a presentation on the employer toolkit with their employees, because they've seen it in their industry, how it has impacted, and they want to bring something positive to their employees and give them that resource. And so they're gonna have us actually do this as a part of their open enrollment, not only just going over their benefits of insurance, but hey, here is something else that's out there for you as a resource.
Yeah, and I think you've probably got all kinds of different employers on the call today, some that are, a part of a large corporation that has capacity to maybe implement the toolkit in its entirety. And then you may have somebody who's running a small business, who maybe is investing the majority of their time in just, hiring people or keeping people employed. And this may seem like a daunting issue for them to address. Can you speak to how this, toolkit can benefit every employer at every level? And I think one thing I would like to just point out before you answer that is the approach that we've taken with it, which is to meet them where they're at. We realize not everybody can implement the entire thing, but speak to the fact that everybody can implement something and how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the fact that it's kind of an a la carte, right? You don't have to do it all. You can see what fits for your business the most. And a lot of times with businesses, they spend money on having their employees out of the field and coming in and having professionals meet with them. And that's the cost of doing business. But having this so that they can implement parts of it, especially if I'm a smaller employer, at no cost, educational pieces. And then if you think about the positive impact you're having, it will tenfold reward that business financially in other areas. Okay. But for sure, yeah, the a la carte, the fact that I can pick and choose which parts of this applies to my business is I think key for this really getting up and off the ground. I don't have to take every piece of the toolkit and employ it at one time.
Yeah. I like that you brought that up, the prevention side of it. So a lot of times when we see toolkits, and there are some really good ones out there, like ours is not the only one, by far. People have invested tons of time and money into it. A lot of the ones you see talk about, recovery friendly toolkits, which is extremely important. Those who are already struggling with this issue and are coming to work every day, or as you mentioned, maybe it's not them personally that struggle, but they have somebody at home that they've left that is going through a substance use disorder, and they're coming to work trying to put their best foot forward, but it's weighing on them. A recovery friendly workplace is extremely important. Can you talk about the importance of the prevention side of things? So the way we describe it is we want to help employers create prevention minded and recovery supportive workplaces. So getting ahead of the issue, I know you mentioned, investing in the toolkit so that there's training to dispose of medication that's sitting around. But what would you say in relation to the benefits side of things, would be a positive to being prevention minded and trying to get ahead of some of this stuff?
Well, I think the prevention minded is the key. And if you were to have an employee of a business that actually sprained their ankle on the job and they had to go to rehab to get their ankle better to do their job, you would think nothing about sending that employee to your approved physical therapist to get the therapy they need. All right. So if somebody is at the point where they're taking, and now we're talking about rehab, we've already missed the opportunity to prevent it. And most people, they whatever it is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, or whatever, there's something that triggers that gets them to where they are. I think with the employer toolkit and the actual prevention minded, it's getting them the resources. And a lot of times, look, as an employee of a business, we sometimes don't want Big Brother checking over our shoulder. And so sometimes we don't use that employee assistance program because we think somehow we're going to get in trouble. If you actually look up the numbers on employee assistance programs, they're the most underutilized resources that there are. And I think with the employer toolkit, and you're giving the employee the access to be able to go out, here are some places you can go and get help, and you just do education. And that's the key, is you just got to educate, you got to educate, you got to educate. We want to be able to educate them about where to go to get the help, and rather than having to deal with down the road after they've already taken the pills or drank too much or started implementing the habits that are what you want to prevent. Because habits can be good or bad. They don't know the difference, right? And we want to make sure that the employers are giving their employees the right habits so they make the right decisions.
And how important is it for employers to create an environment where this can be talked about? You mentioned stigma, and it's almost taboo to bring some of this up around the workplace. But what have you seen with those employers who are willing to, you mentioned education, but at least bring in that component where they can start having conversations about this, knowing that it's impacting the people that they employ and that it's going to affect, culture in the workplace? That's another thing. Like how have you seen that, from the people that are implementing this successfully, creating a normalized culture around speaking about this and just addressing it before it, it happens even? How important is that?
Oh, I think it's huge. The fact that you can actually have a conversation about it and not have I think most people, we think about people with this type of issue as being the homeless drug dealer underneath the street, bridge. And so that's how we view ourselves. And so we don't want to talk about it. And removing the stigma, when we went through this, the DEA agent we had to deal with, because it was fentanyl, we had to deal with the DEA agent. And he said the previous week, he had been at the president of a local bank in San Diego, California's house, where the same thing had happened to him. And so it's not just the homeless guy under the street. It's our brothers, it's our sisters. It is the most highly abused area is going to be in probably our older 40 plus generational people. And so, you know, what we want to do is we want to be able to get people to remove that stigma and feel comfortable talking about it, not condoning it, right? But also making sure we're understanding, like, there's a problem, we want to get them help. If that person was suffering from diabetes, we'd want to get them the right insulin so that they could get themselves help. And the same thing, you'll see in a workforce where if they're comfortable talking to their supervisors, because a lot of these employees, they look, whether they like it or not, they look to their employer for answers. When they don't have money, they go to their employer and ask for an advance on a paycheck. When they have financial problems, a lot of times they ask their employer advice. And in this particular case, they don't know where to go get answers, so they come to their employer and are asking for answers, as long as you've got the environment that's conducive for that.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear that we're not saying that, you know, the business owner or the C-suite individuals have to be subject matter experts when it comes to this. We're not even saying that it should dominate the entire conversation that takes place in the office, but creating an opportunity for people to learn about it and talk about it. And that's why it's important to maybe have a point person, you know, depending on how large your organization is, or the contracting, you know, through some of the resources we have available for people to come in and maybe as a part of a staff meeting, talk about some of these things, you know, for those organizations that maybe aren't big enough to have somebody, you know, kind of dedicated to this HR department or whatever. But just having an openness to learning about it and talking about it, I think is crucial and goes a long way when it comes to employee culture, because whether the leaders realize it or not, the employees know what's happening. They know who's doing what, that it's a part of the culture, whether the leadership realizes it or not. So.
Yeah, and you're right, TJ. It's not that the employer or the HR person has to be an expert in this matter. It's just like, but you know, the one good thing, like if I don't know something, is I know somebody who knows it, or I have somebody I can go, and that's what this employer toolkit is. It's that resource guide. You know, so you don't have to have all the answers, but just the openness to look at it.
Yeah. All right. So in the last minute that we have together, what is one thing, or if you have a couple, maybe a couple things, but one or two things that you would share with leaders on the call today who are looking to, or maybe even considering, you know, engaging with this?
Well, I would say that it's become kind of I don't want to say the new norm, but in the last 2 to 3 years, we've dealt with a lot of mental health issues. And I think this is a mental health issue that develops into an opioid crisis. And so I think that now we just have to be, as leaders, owners of businesses, people in positions of leadership, we have to recognize that and just be willing to at least have the options for the education for the people, at least have the resources for them to be able to seek out help, and the openness to be willing to listen. I think that's key. If I could go back to a couple of years ago and would have been able to probably listen a little bit better to my brother-in-law about things that were going on, maybe we could have intervened. But, you know, for an employer, I would just say, I think it's just nothing more than just the education and the openness and creating that environment so that we can make sure that we don't have to have all the answers, but we have resources where the answers are.
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on, Brock, sharing your story, especially. I know it's tough sometimes, and I know you miss Jonathan every day. Thought it was pretty cool. I can't remember if you mentioned this or not, but your son that you just recently had, you named him after your brother-in-law. So what a great tribute. But thank you for coming on, sharing your expertise, your knowledge from years of experience in the industry, and also your personal story. You're a great friend and a great partner in this work, and we're grateful for your willingness to spend time with us today.
TJ, thank you, and thank you for all the hard work you guys have been doing.
Appreciate it. We're going to turn it back over to Susan to wrap up this webinar.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate your investment and your time and look forward to you getting in touch with us or Brock Powell to see how you can implement this employer toolkit in your workplace. And please sign up for our next workshop, scan this, and you know how to do it. QR code with your phone, scan and sign up, and we'll see you. I think the date is
October 17th.
Thank you. Thanks, Abigail. October 17th. So we look forward to seeing everybody. Have a great afternoon.